tell you, this no-show shit is tough. Deciding what not to wear to work, what not to put in my lunchbox.
You're breaking my heart. You should try sitting
I'm kind of like a, I think people like Michael J. I'm kind of a unique kind of character.
And I have the analytics
and I love
you just see how games and possessions how they mean more. I think the U.S. is going to obviously win.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Nothing But Respect. We are joined. I am joined by Patrick Redford, and we are joined because we were thinking, God, this Clippers news story. There is gonna be some blowback.
That's right.
To this. So who do we call but co-creator of Blowback, ballhead, longtime Nothing But Respect friend of the program, Noah Kulwin. Noah, how are we?
We're good. I just want to emphasize, I know where the blowback is not going to reach. And that's Madison Square Garden. That's absolutely right. There's
That's right,
nothing to
baby.
see there. You know, there's no, just move on. Move on.
It's all above board.
It's all good.
And you know what? I would like to experience Abu Dhabi someday. I take back everything I said on the Tipping Pitches crossover.
Me and my dad, who is also now the coach, would really like to go to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, we're gonna get like the new commercials that we're gonna get, instead of those like ones with like the and like the guy falconing or whatever. Or
Oh, yeah.
'cause they do, falconry is their thing. Instead, it's going to be like Jalen and Rick Brunson, like at like Abu Dhabi SeaWorld, going like, oh.
Mitchell Robinson here for the Yas Island Tourism Bureau.
Mm-hmm.
No, Mitchell Robinson would actually like. He would fucking love, because he loves driving big trucks, and so do they.
Oh.
Like that's a big thing out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, they should be going for it. They think they want star power, but star power is going to bring the eyes. What they should get is like 600 Snapchat stories of Mitchell Robinson in on the tallest building in
I
Abu
like
Dhabi.
that. You know, New York hasn't suffered enough with Jason Pierre-Paul blowing his hand up for the firework, Plaxico Burress shooting himself in the club. You know what we should have? We should have Mitchell Robinson go to go to the Middle East and like ride a Mercedes G-Wagon sideways. I think like as soon as he gets healthy, that would actually, I mean,
That is the 2025 version of shooting yourself in the leg in the club. I gotta say, we're having Noah on, of course, to talk Knicks, to talk Blowback, but we have to start with the Clippers story.
Yes.
Just because it's the story of the NBA offseason, and it just touches on so many interesting parts of like who holds power in the league, how that power is wielded, like. And you see this in both the story itself and the way that it's been covered in the media, sort of like story of its breaking, this really interesting, like almost trilateral balance of power between the players, the leagues, and the teams, and the ways that like the leagues and the teams can be opposed to each other is really interesting. And I can't really think of a scandal where like that line has been highlighted so brightly.
I totally agree. And then I would even add the media, and then like this weird sort of relationship economy is also at play throughout all of this with the various who's coming to whose defense. What is even Pablo Torre himself represents this funny thing where he's like this ESPN guy, but now he's on a podcast, which is typically this new media thing, and podcast can mean many different things, and his podcast has lots of producers where many podcasts don't. So it's a very interesting kind of thing to untangle.
I mean, I think one thing I can say with total confidence is that Pablo Torre is very good at packaging stories.
Yes.
Between this and the Belichick story, because he, as listeners may recall, he was the one who really like hashed out that all is not really well in Chapel Hill vis-a-vis Bill Belichick, his new psycho contract at UNC, and the involvement of his 20-something girlfriend in all this. And so there's already like, he's like, it's, and then there was that beef between Pablo and Bill Simmons.
Yep.
Where Bill Simmons didn't listen to the podcast and was like, wah, 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 wah,
That's
and
so good.
And then got sunned rightfully for it.
Mm-hmm.
The way I found out about this story was posts of people being like, Pablo Torre, ever since Bill Simmons said he isn't doing real journalism with like LeBron gifs.
Literally.
And then I was like, oh, what's Pablo done this time?
I mean, yeah, he's I would also say that one other piece of the like the reception of the story, etc., is that like and this is I think part of what you were getting at, Patrick, is that NBA media and sports media in general right now is driven by the insider. Like, Shams is obviously sort of like with the retirement of Waj, like Shams is the sort of figure at the top of this, but like more or less there are like lots of different insiders, but like what they all share in common is that they get early access to privileged information because they have good relationships with the principals.
Yes.
And it is really difficult to talk about stories in which the principals only look bad.
Yes.
And only like look like they've broken the rules. And so we've now gotten, after the story has come out, after these allegations have have been reported and substantiated in most respects pretty totally, you get this like really rather astonishing rearranging of deck chairs, like in conformance with obviously people's pretty private loyalties to who gives them information, or as YKB might put it, slop.
Well, like there was some Lakers guy, I believe it was Anthony Irwin, who was sort of trying to, I think maybe cast some doubts on the veracity of Pablo's reporting by being like, it's curious that the most plugged in NBA insider like hasn't touched this story. And I think he's
yeah, isn't it?
Isn't it? Exactly.
That's a great observation.
It's like, damn, like interesting. Yeah. It's like this story could only be broken by someone who doesn't have those access points. Like,
no, that makes, oh my God. I mean,
what a wild way to misread the story.
Well, but the thing is also is like, I did see a lot of people be like, I have never seen sports journalism so powerful, so deep, so nourishing, so effective in the last 20 years. To which I say, like, come on.
It is a hell of a scoop, though, and we should.
It's a great scoop, but obviously my point is that like people are acting like 10 years ago we didn't have like by comparison far more vibrant sports media industry in which like things in which Deadspin, for example, and ESPN are racing to the finish to get the Manti Te'o story. You know what I mean? Like it's just there is like a bit of it's like the story is good and people have like forgotten what good food fucking tastes like.
No, there's an unlimited amount of kind of like, I think we will spend a large chunk of this discussing these sort of meta discourse around this. I will quickly walk through a little bit of just like what literally happened so we can talk. And I also did I did not mean to stumble into an Israeli connection here, but I sometimes you can't go that far without hitting one.
You got to follow the story to where it goes.
Exactly. It's just a Harry Krinsky finds out. Okay. Well, actually, and I want to ask you some questions as we're going because did you guys know about Aspiration?
No, never heard of it.
I had never heard of it either, which one of the parts that I really admire about this piece is that there is a larger conversation about like carbon offset and like the dumb bullshit that surrounds that and like, ESG investing and all of this stuff that Pablo forget anything about whether or not Ballmer is guilty of it. Pablo has really shined a interesting light on what is ultimately an extremely wonky topic. It's this like weird, there's this weird thing, people can buy and sell stuff and you think it's a good idea, but if you dig into the under the hood, actually maybe it's a bad idea. It's confusing. So
I will say though, to me, I did find like in reading this in both like watching I did find in watching the Torre pod and then in reading like the let's say that like a lot of stories around it, that how orthogonal to the main story the like Aspiration's actual business was. Because like what Aspiration's most important connection is here is that it's a sponsor. Like it's a sponsor of the Clippers, and that part of what they sell as a sponsor, like part of why they are good to take on as a sponsor, is that like they allow teams like the Boston Red Sox to say like we're the first like cabin neutral team in Major League Baseball. And I think that like it's like, all right, like that's a nice bit of marketing or whatever. But what that kind of suggests to me is that, and also like zoomed out a bit, like the Los Angeles Lakers and the Clippers play in the Intuit Dome, but the Lakers play in Crypto.com Arena.
Right.
Like shady sponsorships, and particularly shady ones, like in terms of financial terms. I mean, the first stadium naming rights deal, the first basketball naming rights deal, I learned this fact in researching a piece for the Bathroom a few years ago, was the Forum, the predecessor to the Intuit Dome. And it was a sale to an SNL bank. I think it was Great Western was the name of that one. And it became the Great Western Forum in Inglewood. And then, of course, that bank later went tits up. WAMU, another savings, a bank that expired in the financial crash, had a sponsorship deal with like part of MSG or whatever. All of which is to say that like for as long as like Major League Sports have been accepting either naming rights deals or been entering into partnerships with these kinds of companies and sponsorship, like you've had this kind of like, let's say like the relevance of Aspiration, as I understand it, is that there are people who are like a pile of money that is adjacent as a business partner to a bunch of sports franchises. How they make that money, and if you really buy that, being a broker for carbon offsets is that lucrative, then like be my fucking guest. It's not, but like and the federal government seems to think so as well. But like that to me was just to jump in there, like struck me as the most important piece of what their business was, is how utterly irrelevant it was, aside from the fact that it was this pool of money that could be used, for like brand enhancement on the part of the Clippers, and in this case, a bit more perhaps.
Yeah.
Yes, totally. And like this type of, there is this kind of splashy, it's sort of ironic that this story is now coming back and probably is the worst PR that Ballmer's had, is because like the only difference between like this particular place where you hold your money and some other dumbass place where you hold your money is you get to say that your stadium is carbon neutral, which is like, what does that mean?
And if one had the interest of being like, I want to give my star like $20 gazillion under the table, then like where people won't look is the ethical company.
Right.
They won't, if like Palantir was doing it, then maybe people would be like,
it's like reverse sports washing almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So what happened?
Yes. So, Aspiration is this company that kind of purported to, like Noah said, broker credits for carbon offsets, which is whatever. You can figure out what all that stuff is. You can't follow every thing because we'll end up everywhere because of the nature of the story. This company, this was already known before Pablo Torre broke the story. The company ended up going bankrupt. They defrauded a bunch of people. They what originally seemed just sort of like a bad business that went belly up, it's now seeming like was a scam where heads of Aspiration, knowingly misled people. Some people are have gone to jail, I believe, either are currently in under litigation or are literally in jail. One of the main one being Joe Sandberg. There's one other fellow. Andre Cherney is not actually in legal issues right now, but he was one of the co-founders of this company, and he's got his own kind of wonky political history. But the idea is that the company helps other institutions, including some Israeli ones, which we'll talk about, become carbon neutral. In the process of this company going bankrupt, a lot of the filings become public record, and Pablo Torre did some digging and found out that, wow, a shit ton of money was going to Kawhi Leonard. And then he did some more digging. He talked to some sources and basically was able to find, I would say, two pieces of smoking gun stuff, which we will get into. The one is this no-show contract that is a $28 million contract for endorsement deals that was essentially, you can endorse this or you don't need to do anything. And Kawhi did not do anything. The second one is a slate of sources on the record saying, hey, what's the deal with all this money? I'll tell you what the deal with all this money. This was Steve Ballmer using the money to pay Kawhi Leonard, and we weren't allowed to touch it. We weren't allowed to use it, and like that's the deal. So this is where I think it's helpful to be like, so like, how is there even an argument against Pablo? And
I agree. Yeah, this is where like you have to start. You have to begin from like a premise of like, well, the story as presented can't be true. So let's come up with some stuff because like. The no-show thing is to me the single piece of it's like, okay, if there was any like, have you ever heard of an above-board no-show deal? Like, there's a reason it's like a staple of the fucking Sopranos. Sorry, like
It's also so funny to imagine if he would have just done like one Instagram grid post. Is this like not a scandal? Because he can be like, look, I did my endorsement work.
And so this also then gets to like the fact that it is so airtight. Then sort of raises what like I think. Harry has identified as like the central question that this is like sort of pointing to, which is what did Steve Ballmer know and when did he know it? Mm-hmm. And I think that question is like, well, you know, I'm not gonna like I don't think you need to like suck off a billionaire's like you know like business aptitude to be like, oh well, Steve Ballmer's smart enough to never get close to that. Like the NBL has retained Wachtell, you know, a white shoe law firm in New York City that like will not fuck around. And other owners have a big fucking interest in like seeing Ballmer get wrapped across the knuckles like this because, and this gets to like why I think the Ballmer question is so important. As cynical as I am about how the sport works and as Major League Sports in general, I do believe this is pretty unusual. Mm-hmm. I think that transactions like this are incredibly difficult to hide, in part because the counterparties are themselves dishonest, as is the case here. And so probably part of why this story is coming out at all is because the fucking Justice Department is investigating this office full of people who know what's going on and evidently talked to Pablo about it. Like this was all eventually going to come out in some fashion or another, even if in a much more muted way. So there is to me like this question of like, all right, that is an interesting question. It is indeterminate. The reporting does not resolve it, which is the specific of what did Ballmer know? And I think that, you know, you'd have to be pretty gullible to think like the billionaire owner of this team wouldn't know the minutia of how its most expensive piece of payroll gets paid. On the other hand, like you could imagine like, you know, I could hypothesize a situation in which he's like, I don't know. I don't want to know. And like what that, you know, and that is itself like a very epically bad and corrupt form of management. But that to me has been like where this arrives at. The like the Ballmer question is also what the sports media people have seized on, especially.
Yes,
absolutely.
And the argument that Ballmer and those people would make would be that like the timing of Kawhi getting paid right around when he signs that Clippers deal is a coincidence. Like you have to fundamentally believe that. And then from there you would say, okay, it's a coincidence and that money, this is not a Clippers thing. Like whether or not they were trying to like launder money through Kawhi or just picked a spokesman who forgot to post or whatever, like those are separate questions. But like the idea that they want you to believe that this just happened to happen at the same time, and wasn't Aspiration involved in like the naming rights deal? Mm-hmm. Like they bid along with Intuit, right?
They bid and they were going to be a jersey sponsor. They weren't. They would have made our list. And then the other part that is important. That feels like, because so jumping ahead a little bit, Mark Cuban goes tweeted out about this article, basically being like he's Team Ballmer. He believes that Ballmer was scammed, and basically that's all that happened, and the rest of this is sort of disappointing, but not malpractice. And goes on the show and has this very long conversation with Pablo Torre about it. The crux of Or we've outlined sort of the crux of what Cuban was saying, which is like, I guess actually when you get that rich, you don't need to manage your fucking shit, which definitely doesn't pass the smell test to me. But the other part that especially does not pass the smell test is the idea that it would be smart for Aspiration to have Kawhi in a no-show job for the Clippers to be good because the Aspiration is associated with the Clippers.
I just always, you know, that's the thing they say about 8-figure brand activations. That when they don't activate, that's actually a good thing.
He has more time to relax,
off, man,
and heal from as many injuries.
Now, like everybody, I mean, I think YKB already like made this point, but like if this is like Cuban's line, then like fucking like get the forensic accountants out and like show me the money, show me the dirt on Dirk, show me Mr. Team fucking favorite Dirk Nowitzki. Like, okay, like Mr. Cuban, I think you may be a little like sticking your neck out here, perhaps.
And the deal that Dirk took that year was like 21 million or something. And I think there are the ESPN reports from the time that note that like the Rockets and the Lakers are going to pay him like 95 million. Like they were lining up to pay him 5x more. And like, also people have looked into just like Clippers free agent signings throughout the years. Like Nicholas Batum is getting paid like way less than market rate. Like this is not the first thing. And it's also like crucial to remember Ballmer's rep as an owner is like good owner, very involved, and has $2 billion of his own money.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Have you ever, how many times, like the number of times I have heard Brian Windhorst correct somebody on the point of like, well, yes, he's the richest owner in sports. And it's like you like, or like, you know, or well, he's not the second, he's actually the richest. But it's like, that's all part of the fucking sell. That is, yes, that he is, you know, that players can go to the Clips and expect to get paid. And look, maybe the way players understand this, and I wouldn't be surprised, is that like the Clips were a bottom 4 franchise for most of their existence. And this is like, you know, like spraying money at the players is like part of how you get that stink washed off. I think that's also a bit of like motivated reasoning, to put it mildly. But one question that I had that like coming up out of all this as well, though, was like, you know, if you did all this creative accounting to get you Kawhi Leonard, like, was it worth it at all? Was this even, you know, as like conceptually? Like, did it work out at all? Did it, you know, like as evidently as drawn up as we can tell? And if not, like, was there, you know, like, because to me that would be the defense to run with, right? Yeah. Which is that like that what you're describing is an idea so stupid. Why would the Clippers go all in on this player who couldn't by himself possibly alter fortunes like this, you know?
Yeah.
Who's not like a Wemby or something like that.
Well, and we're having this conversation months after the player that they traded essentially for Kawhi just raised the championship MVP trophy, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, in the playoffs.
It would be very funny if in part of this, like say Ballmer does get seriously, say it's all true and Ballmer does get in trouble, he is going to be in a lot of trouble.
Oh, wait, we forgot one other piece of this that like in the chronology, which is the Toronto Star story that just came out.
Oh, okay. Because I haven't seen this actually.
So Bruce Arthur, a journalist at the Toronto Star, essentially like the real like Uncle John's bathroom reader for dummies, you know, Reader's Digest version of it is that Kawhi and his uncle tried to pull something very similar to what sounds like happened with Aspiration when they were in Toronto. And like the structure of the deal that they sought to try and make happen is so like sounds like what has just been uncovered that it really like you really have to start again. It's just more evidence that shows that like nobody was tricked, nobody fell into whatever this aspiration was by accident. Like if people were scammed, like, you know, if Kawhi and them had like tried to do this or whatever before and Ballmer wasn't a part of it in Toronto, obviously, because what the fuck does Ballmer have to do with Toronto? Then fine, that might be an out for Ballmer, but it sure does not look good for Kawhi and his uncle.
Yes, and basically what this makes it seem is that like Ballmer maybe was like approached by like Uncle Dennis and Kawhi, because I'm just going to read a little bit here from the Arthur story. It's that two details stand out in retrospect. One, Robertson, that's Uncle Dennis, asked for ownership stakes in outside companies, not just the Leafs. He asked for ownership shares of the Toronto Maple Leafs, which is so funny.
Oh God, that's so good. I want points. Give me points.
The Raptors were told they needed to match at least $10 million per year in extra sponsorship income. So basically what that's saying is like, you need to pay me under the year. Yeah. And he said specifically, Kawhi did not want to work. He did not want to do anything for the money. So he wanted literally a no-show job. And so that's not exculpatory for Ballmer. That makes me think like he realized, you know, speculation, this is all alleged by other people, not me, that like, basically he saw that this would be the price to get him in the door. And remember, this is like, he's having some new ownership syndrome at this point. Like, yeah, this is sort of his version of like the Ishbia convening the unction in Phoenix. But like, you know, he gets in, he wants to win immediately. He gets the two best players in the market. Like, it doesn't work, but like, he clearly was going to do whatever it took to compete, you know?
Yeah.
And the other, and I think everybody should just go listen to the Pablo Torre piece and all this stuff, because he really lays all of the like facts out very clearly. The other just sort of why this feels true to me is this component of like, so you're telling me the most ruthless, successful businessman whose whole second half of his career has basically been like shuttling Microsoft through various regulatory loopholes is not aware of what's going on here.
He's just a little guy. He's stupid.
That part, it just, and wouldn't, and I think there's an interesting conversation here about like how unethical is all of this, because it is this funny thing where, well, we'll see, right? I to Noah's point, who knows what other shoes will drop, but at this point, there is nothing illegal that Ballmer has done. There is just things that are not allowed under the NBA collective bargaining agreement. And for me, at least, when a player wants to get more money or wants to bend the rules to get more money, I'm sort of like, I'm sympathetic to this. But there is this it's the same reason gambling can't happen. There is an underpinning of the idea that what we are watching is fairness. Like what the people have as close to all the same, resources at their disposal as best as we can get it. And if this is true, I mean, that's a real breach. Like that's a real breach.
Oh, and on top of which, like, this is part of why I've been so kind of disgusted by the like preemptive, like, oh, Ballmer's just like, he won't get punished and da 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 da, and all that. This what to me feels like a fairly aggressive, like sort of soft defense of him, is that like, well, there are a lot of people who like would really be quite pissed if he didn't get something for this, and who have a vested interest and who actually compose the majority of the league's ownership and who gets a say in pressuring Adam Silver. And the second thing is that like, okay, let's say he doesn't get punished. Does that mean that owners who want to compete are now going to think like, fuck, like, do I have to work with every single car dealership in the area to make sure that like there's enough extra gravy around for me not to have to work that hard to give it in spoken contract negotiations that can't come up in discovery? I mean, that's where like, I think I agree with you on the point about fairness, not because like I think the NBA system is designed for fairness or whatever, but because like, yeah, like especially in the second apron era or whatever, when teams that compete essentially are building rosters that are only designed to last for like 2 to 3 years for windows of contention. It's like the idea of like, oh yeah, well then there's just one team and maybe some more that aren't playing by that. Like, like I understand, like I hope to fucking God there's nothing wrong with the Knicks contracts and that they're all above board. But like, I understand why a lot of people like bugged out in that way when Brunson took a very team friendly contract.
Yeah. And like the story goes in so many other directions that just like the existence of the salary cap isn't really like one of the top 5 most interesting things to talk about it. But like an obvious takeaway here. And like, you see this, especially in the W with the charter flights, the way that was all metabolized, and like the ACES Convention Authority essentially doubling everyone's salaries for free, is that like the point here is that like the labor that the players are performing is worth more than they are compensated for because of the artificiality of the salary cap system. And it's interesting that like why the owners would be so mad at Ballmer is basically for what you said. It's like, don't fuck up the money.
Right.
Yes,
like
exactly.
Our profits rely on this like wage suppression. That's like a core component of NBA team values.
And that's where like I get a lot of people who have like an instinct to be like, well, if Ballmer wants to pay players, let Ballmer play players. And it's like, I agree with that like pretty wholeheartedly, just because like it's clear that, when you remove a cap, like the like the money goes down, like, or the money trickles down, like it does change the base of compensation. It's just that when one guy does it and the rest don't, that creates, and like, look, like they hid this for like this deal was hidden and done with like some stupid shady company for a reason.
Yeah, like
we don't-
Nike is not going to pay LeBron
Exactly.
an extra $100 million a year at like, I guess whoever the new Lakers owner.
And that's just not, like I think one of the dynamics of professional sports that is, sort of you can see in all the leagues is that while there are big market teams that are clearly what the commissioner cares about and what all the owners actually do care about, in spite of what gets said, they do care about these big market teams because they know that that's what drives a lot of the TV revenue or whatever. Ultimately, the majority of teams are not from those big markets. They are not the majority of the composition of the owners. And they're gonna like they know how protected they are by these caps. Like they know how badly it is to like circumvent that especially if you're a team like LA or whatever that, while not a conventional big market team, is obviously being reshaped by Ballmer into this, not just because Ballmer loves competing and gosh, pouring so much money into winning, but because he knows winning teams are way more valuable.
Right. Yeah.
Like it's, like the Warriors 15 years ago were like a joke of a franchise nobody cared about on paper valuation. No offense, Harry, but like they are now one of the most blue chip like teams around because of like a 6 to 7 year run. Yeah,
and because they own their own building and did a bunch of crazy real estate connected to it, which is also what Ballmer did.
I was about to say, which is, by the way, like it's hard to wrap your head around, almost in a like the Chinatown, the movie kind of way, the like financial upside Steve Ballmer has if the Clippers are good.
Yeah.
Like he owns he could like speed run gentrification of a neighborhood in like the third most expensive city in America. Like,
and the Lakers just got sold for $10 billion up the road. It's like, that's so much power.
It is hard.
I mean, owning sports franchises is right now, like people have got to kind of get this through their heads. Like Mets fans too, about like Steve Cohen. Like sports franchises are, especially if you lavish money on them, intelligently, not like Ishbia,
right.
But like if you spend well and intelligently, then you are making yourself a ton of money in the long run. And, that's like the thing that like kernel of truth is what Cuban is exploiting when he says like, well, why wouldn't Aspiration want to like be a part of a winning thing? And it's like, kind of, if like it matters that people associate them with the Clippers for their carbon offset brokering business and their special credit card that they had to stop issuing because the government made them stop. But like, that's not really how it works for the fucking owner of the team in terms of capturing that rise in value. Like, come on.
So we are talking about a lot of the sort of media around this. We're referencing this Cuban interview, which we'll talk about. I want to transition into the meta discourse section, but I do want to share one final thing. I was teasing this Israel connection. It isn't like, though I have to say I was kind of interested that Pablo left it out. Like I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I needed to Google a fair amount to find this, but there are some predictable and kind of interesting connections between what the hell is the company called? Aspiration and Israel. One, Aspiration attempted to make the Israel Philharmonic carbon neutral. Which is kind of an.
Did it work?
I'm actually. I am not sure. The phrase in this interview that Joe Sandberg gave, because Joe Sandberg has supported a number of sort of Zionist causes, it seems. And
I mean, where the fuck do you think he got by the way, here's how they offset the carbon is that they plant trees. Where do you think he got that idea from? The fucking JNF, which obviously, like, I mean, for listeners who don't know, like one of the defining, like, national institutions of Israel is the Jewish National Fund, which has for decades planted trees all over Israel, both to like reforest land, I guess, but like in large part to also make sure, and this is, they do a lot of shady stuff with like land deeds, stealing land from Palestinians, and also to like put trees over lands that Palestinians can't return there, or that like the land can't be contested by them or claimed by them. So it's like, yeah, like Aspiration has an Israeli partnership. This like country that like does like company that does fraudulent tree planting. I would never guess that.
I wanted to say this phrase, one, because it's now seared in my head, but also because it just gets another example of sort of leveraging conflating Judaism and Israel, which is a at this point a almost cliche thing to bring up because it happens so much. The idea of automating tzedakah into your daily routine is something that Joe Sandberg said.
Can I ask a question? Yeah. What does that mean?
I think it's like setting up like a recurring payment to like donate to charity.
Swag.
Like, when actually automating tzedakah is like when you agree to like give like Planned Parenthood $10 a month because you like got stopped on the street by somebody after like reading a really painful headline.
Yeah.
And they're just like, all right, I'm a mark. Take my money.
Tzedakah.
Take my money, even though I've read a bunch of articles about why you're problematic.
Tzedakah is a Jewish phrase for charity.
Oh, okay.
And so it's but I mean, this is the whole thing. It's like it's leveraging this Jewish value that everybody fucking believes in fucking charity, but and turning it into.
I mean, it's a staple of religious, like tithing. Like in the Bible, it says tithe your income like 10% to charity, what have you. It's just such a goofy. Again, it's just like this is like a business that's founded by people who went to Harvard who don't actually want to work for a living.
Sure.
Can we use AI? You think to enhance things like this?
Yeah, we can automate tzedakah.
I think there's
AI.
some findings.
All right, yeah, maybe we should cut that.
There's some learnings.
It's a valuable business opportunity. Anyway, sorry, Harry, carry on.
The last one I'll give another thing that just broke my brain is the soon-to-be public company also had recently made headlines for initiatives with Israeli actress Noah Tishby, which will offset the carbon footprint of her recent book. I love offsetting the carbon footprint of my recent book. Israel, a simple guide to the most misunderstood country on earth. So that book is carbon neutral, which is surely good.
Carbon neutral book.
Yeah.
They like counted out the number of like inches in a tree that it took to print, a book. And that's what they got. Just one book though.
Yeah.
Just the one book.
Yeah.
They didn't do the other books.
Someone should invent, instead of carbon neutral, we need like carbon positive or carbon negative, whatever the good one it is. They should just be, if it's a,
like celery.
Yeah, exactly. Like a largely fictitious company, just be like, we're going to reverse this climate change shit. It's over. Like if you're going to tell a lie, like tell a more interesting lie.
Just do the whole thing. Yeah.
They have a lot of also like, I found one thing that to be kind of interesting with this too, though, is that this is like such a 2010s like Obama era like style scam of it's like, oh, you're gonna make money and we're gonna change the world, and like a child like children in Africa will also get a pair of Toms.
Yeah.
Yes.
It did feel a little bit like time out of place. Because right now, I mean, especially because like right now I am convinced, right? Like the more contemporary appropriate version of this would be like, oh, it turns out that like Palantir has been like giving Saquon stock or something, or like, I don't know, some other company that does like your like episode about sponsors. I mean, there are some quotidian ones, a lot of healthcare companies, I will say, like you like brand washing themselves with it, but like it just seems like like we're getting everybody's all the sponsors now are just Experience Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, New Age grills.
Yeah.
It's either like banal or evil. Like there's no like I don't even know what a sponsor would be that I would be like, oh, that's cool. I mean, I guess the Sphere one.
Blue Diamond almonds. I was listening to Zach Lowe had some sports lawyer guy on today, and one of the most interesting things he said was like, he brought up how many new owners are private equity people who just have these massive portfolios of like all these huge companies that are like connected to them, the figure of the owner. And you get into this weird gray area where it's like hard to tell if a player does like a personal endorsement, basically.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, it just so happens that like Josh Harris owns like 20% of that. Like finding a way to draw the line between like what is and is not team approved becomes increasingly difficult in this like incredibly financialized NBA ownership class.
This though gets to what I was saying earlier though about how like that is absolutely true. That in terms of like if you're looking for conflict of interest by like the letter of the law, you could find it like everywhere. The question is, how many of those conflicts involve like incredibly convoluted deals that have spelled out no-show requirements? Like this is again where it comes back to. It's like, yes, I agree. It is interesting, this like wild tangled web of capitalism that has been weaved. But like that's kind of only part of what's under discussion. Because what's really under discussion is the fact that like there existed a contract for Kawhi Leonard to get paid $28 million to scratch his ass, and it was by like it was by a company that had just received $1 gazillion from the owner, and there are a bunch of employees who are on background saying, yeah, this was all deliberate.
Which, by the way, we only found out about because the fucking company went bankrupt.
Yes.
And filed for bankruptcy.
Yes.
Like, who
Yes.
knows how many other no-show contracts there are out there? And I agree with your original point. Like, I at least hope, and it feels untenable to believe, because I do believe what you were saying and what even Cuban brought up with it, like, the NBA is not like covering its eyes. Like the NBA is doing its due diligence. Like they have high-powered lawyers. I believe it, but it's a game of cat and mouse. And like, that's what the game of these.
And by the way, like the rule of it is that, if you're the one who gets caught, then like you're going to suffer the consequences.
Yeah,
Like, and
yeah.
so
Yes.
if the Clippers, if it turns out, if Wachtel finds that, essentially if Wachtel at minimum corroborates the Torre story, then the Clippers are still they're gonna get dinged. I don't know how.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not my fucking department, but like, it doesn't seem like by the logic of how these kinds of stories play out in the past, in terms of like when it's not as extreme, and I don't think you can defend it as extreme as the Astros stealing signals, but like it's in the same ballpark of like when a team does something and they get caught on it, and they're probably not the only team in the league that has done it or is maybe doing it actively. Like they still have to get in trouble. That's like they've been caught. That's the rule. They're they were the last ones to climb over the fence, fleeing the house party by the cops. Like should have been faster. Sorry.
And I hesitate to systematize this or characterize it as like more of a movement than just like this sort of natural expression of whatever phase of capitalism we're in now. But like you're seeing this thing both with like the Anthropic settlement where they had to pay like this tiny slap on the wrist for stealing all those books, and like the Elon Musk carbon credits thing, and then also like buying Twitter to create his own reality. There's so much like this move of like the way you can accumulate and exercise power is just break the rules as often as you can, as forcefully as possible, and just bet on like regulatory arbitrage that you will not be punished in a commensurate way with like the transgressions you made, basically.
It's the micro version of Draymond Green fouling on every play.
Yes, exactly.
They cannot blow the whistle every time.
and like it's like a better sign for a player that like they foul out constantly than that like they're a big that never gets fouled.
Yeah.
Like,
That's the
like,
perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Like yeah.
So, okay, I wanted to ask, get the there's a few meta topics I want to hit. One is, talk to me about what you guys felt about the way the various power players in the NBA media community responded to this piece, because I think the response will still happen. We were recording this Tuesday night. This is not going to come out for a week, but I still think the immediate blast radius conversation is worthwhile because a lot of interesting stuff happened. I'll name a few. One, Mark Cuban comes out tweeting basically, I don't give a shit about this. I hope it happened to Ballmer from a Mavs perspective, but I just straight up think he didn't do it. Then he goes on Pablo Torre's podcast and they do an hour and a half kind of follow-up thing. Steve Ballmer also flies to Bristol, Connecticut to do an in-person sit-down interview with Ramona Shelburne, which it was ridiculous.
Well, and then Windhorst and Bontemps and did like a kind of debrief convo, or I forget. I think it was Windhorst talked to Ramona Shelburne, and then there was like a separate conversation following up. I forget if they did it all as one. And Windhorst, they were very everything was so hedged. A lot of the statements, like people are really, nobody wants to say that they're trying to give the Clippers the benefit of the doubt while giving the Clippers the benefit of the doubt, because the worst thing would be if it turns out that everybody wants because everybody wants everything to get along all the time. Like the assumption I have to assume is that everybody's hoping for the 1% outcome, which is that like Pablo Torre was systematically misled, like the protagonist at the beginning of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, that like he has been duped or whatever by the villain or whatever. I don't know,
Right.
but something like that.
The ESPN in-house response is also like from what we were talking about there is like very in line with the Ballmer talking points. Like Dave McMenamin on TV and Ramona Shelburne in sort of like subsequent SportsCenter appearances have all just been like, there are all kinds of sponsorship deals that straddle this line, as if that's like exculpatory.
Yeah, I think Bontemps was a little bit harder, if I remember correctly. I'm pretty sure it was Bontemps than Wendy was. But the thing that really just stuck out to me was how, like, once I actually sat and, like, I watched, like, I would say like 50 minutes of the podcast, but I read I read a transcript, and then I read like the corroborating articles and stuff. I was kind of like appalled. I got to say, I was pretty appalled at how many people were kind of bending over backwards to like talk about how, they were rendering decisions on the facts based on the optics of how they were being defended, not on the merits. And it was, like, why would Ballmer come to Bristol if he thought he like had something to hide or whatever? Why would he try to get out in front of this? In spite of the fact that, like, there may not be quote unquote smoking gun paper, but you do have to be really stupid to look at the fact pattern that Pablo Torre came out and not see, like, like something that is like worthy of a rap across the knuckles.
Yeah.
And that to me was like, that was my reaction, was that, like, the NBA media initial response has been, with the exception of Howard Beck, who did a really good piece for The Ringer. I saw, I think it was today, alongside a podcast, and he did like a round the league sourcing story, and his was just, which means that, like, if you do that legwork, that you will get something closer to the reality, which is that they're not taking this line down. They're mad.
Yes.
Everybody wants to know what the fuck is going on.
And that's something that's so intriguing to me about so many of the ESPN people. I wouldn't say being pro Ballmer is maybe not like an accurate characterization, but like being much more skeptical of the Pablo report than we are is like, okay, if you think about them as like access merchants to a certain degree, like, why is Ballmer the one worth defending if all these other NBA people are pissed, and like, if there's this big investigation, like, you would think that reflexively they would just do whatever the league, says. Like, it's like the Shams thing, where it's like, Shams hasn't touched this because I think it's like his, I don't want to say paymasters, but like the people who tell him what to do haven't really like figured out what the story is yet. So like, why do you think there's this like sort of pro Ballmer valence to things?
The only thing I can think of is that before they are competitors, they are members of the billionaire class together, like that. Yes. Like, Cuban wants, as a Mavs fan or Mavs owner, Cuban wants this, but as a billionaire, if Cuban fucked up, he would want everybody to at least give a good faith interpretation of what went on. And so that feels like the larger lines being drawn. As far as the ESPN stuff, it's so funny. Like, to me, the ESPN, there's been many kind of slow meandering 0.25 speed death rattles of ESPN, but the like weird YouTube 16-minute sit down interview with Ballmer where he's like, you can almost see the PR emails being exchanged in real time, like of like, Ramona's going to ask this, and then he's going to ask this, and then he's going to like be able to come out and say unequivocally that he welcomes an annunciation.
I mean, I will say that, like, this is part of why it's like one of the things about our current media environment is that once upon a time, ESPN would have just reported this fucking story themselves.
Yes, right.
And then they would have had Ballmer come on for the interview on ESPN, and the reporter who wrote the story would have been able to press Ballmer, and it wouldn't have been like this like bizarre abstracted process where it's like Pablo Torre, YouTuber affiliated, part of The Athletic or whatever. And it's like, I don't think, like, I am sure that Pablo Torre, I am sure that he tried to get an interview with Ballmer. Like, obviously, they requested comment, and I'm sure they requested an interview. And I'm sure after the story came out, Pablo Torre is the first guy to say, let's pod about it,
Yeah.
And I think that Ballmer is smart enough to know no fucking way, and that's not going to happen. And that ESPN no longer permits itself, like, without being too hard on Ramona Shelburne, who I think did like a fine job with like a bad hand, right. Because I just don't think that assignment which is like, let Steve Ballmer pop off for 15 minutes is like necessarily going to do you good, because like he doesn't, his defense is that it was a coincidence.
Right.
And so if he just does that, then he's just to say that over and fucking over again. But it is like this, sense of like, yeah, like ESPN doesn't have the dignity to say no to that kind of thing.
Right.
And it is a bit of like, maybe it is, like, I don't think Ballmer fucking had to call up the headquarters of the Mouse to like get the sit down on ESPN. I think it was I think they would have viewed it as a huge get.
Yeah.
It's just that like, there's no, like the way that this whole thing plays out is as like it's the ping pong of a PR battle and not like an evolving news story where there's which is better reflected by the Bruce Arthur story from Toronto, which like advances it and says that like takes seriously the original encounters. I'm sure that there are other follows being worked on right now. It's just that like the way most people seem to consume sports media are through these media through like podcasts or like the TV networks or whatever that are just not disinterested in the same way and are moreover like actually like rather invested in like the initial soft defense of the owner until like we get like somebody who like comes for until there is the so-called smoking gun, an already like annoying piece of figurative language that doesn't usually describe often how good journalism works.
I just watched all the President's Men last week. Such a banger, really good smoking gun in that one. But what I was going to say is that for decades, there's been this contradiction between ESPN having broadcast rights for these leagues and like the health of the leagues, like largely depending on like the size of the TV deal. And then them ESPN also having this like journalistic arm where they will like have this obligation to report negative, potentially damaging stories about the leagues. And like that contradiction was less and less of not a big deal, but like it wasn't as present in like the day-to-day operations of ESPN because there was this thriving media ecosystem that like ESPN was part of. And there was like a magazine and there was like more focus on like investigative journalism type stories. But now that like there isn't really like the Times doesn't even have a sports desk anymore. Like sports media as a going concern has been much more decimated, which makes the concentration of power like that much more glaring.
I would also say I think sports media has been decimated in the sense that institutions that used to exist no longer do. But sports media has not been decimated in the sense that there are more people than ever consuming sports content, and they're consuming it from concerns that are growing. It just so happens that those going concerns are like run by like fucking charlatans and hacks and sellouts that like often got their start just like peddling like tits and ass pictures on the internet and like to the like not so subtle smirks of everybody in the C-suites of the companies that would then invest and acquire this content. Like it's very easy to see how it's all played out. Where that rebalancing, as I would consider it, has kind of like most becomes visible is in these moments when all of a sudden like the interests diverge. Where it's like the league's interest, Ballmer's interest, the players' interest, the media's interest, like they're all like, those are four lines that are going in very different directions, each of them, for the most part. And I think that is one of, we most pay attention to or become most conscious of the moments at which like sports media has regressed when we see that like it's just really unequipped to like quickly digest and respond as, in the way that it used to as like a stable news media ecosystem to a story like this. Because now it's like fucking like if you had been paying attention to all the podcasts and all this stuff, you would have spent the days until now thinking that like, oh, this story might blow over. Not that what not that what just did happen, which is that there are follow-ons confirming very similar incidents, broadening the base of facts here would be coming. And I don't think that would have been an assumption that these people would have made 10 years ago.
Yeah.
This is a good transition because I wanted to talk about the medium, like the combination of story medium, the ongoing experiment that Pablo Torre is doing. Because I think I just think it's really interesting. And like before, I have some criticisms, big picture, but like broadly, I'm very happy that he is undertaking this. And like, I like that he is trying. And I like that he is attempting to fuse sort of like this decaying algorithmic focused universe with like thoughtful, robust content. I think I have a sort of open-ended question. Do you think the video podcast is a good medium for this kind of story?
I have like a combination no and self-recusal here just because like I do not watch. I don't understand how people watch videos like that. Like I need to read it. I can't watch. I can't get my news from a YouTube video. But even then, I still think the answer is probably yes, just because like so many people do. Like I know so many people who just like all they do is like you open up the laptop at lunch, eat your little bowl of stuff, and just like watch a 30-minute YouTube
or it's
video.
like on the screen while you do other stuff. No, I agree with you on both counts. I'm an article man through and through, but like I just can't deny that like people respond to this stuff, and also that like the parasocial thing that is like a really huge part of like what makes pieces, I think, and individual pieces of content travel now, which is that like not just a parasocial bond with the individual who makes the content, but like an affective, like emotional bond with the story. And you know, it's it's a bit cliche to call this stuff like WWEification, or that it's, you know, the creation of a new kind of like light kayfabe that, you know, sort of like is makes drama out of the distribution of a story like this, enhancing the content of it itself or whatever. But to me, it is like the thing that gets lost is that like we have, and I don't think that this is like Pablo's fault, because I fucking make a podcast too. Like I'm not really
We're
interested.
on a podcast.
I think it would be kind of insane to
You
throw
should get
some
all
stuff.
your news from podcasts.
Yeah.
Actually, podcasts specifically.
Precisely. But the thing that like is and like he clearly has seen a lane that like just does not exist right now and is occupying it, and I think that's terrific. But like what gets lost is that there are traditional benchmarks of like quality and rigor that people associate, and like they know to associate the gravity of something with those hallmarks. And sometimes, you know, like the A1 above the fold for New York Times front page story has that effect. You know, when leaders of foreign countries want to know what the elite American consensus opinions are, they open up the front page of the New York Times. They're not waiting to see what the YouTube algorithm serves them. I'm being only a little bit glib there, because I do think that like the distinction is important when you're looking at how, you know, what is then the value of this whole of presenting a story like this as a podcast. It's that it meets people where they are, but like by meeting them where they are, you sometimes lose the ability to convey the gravity of it. And I think that that's where like Pablo's way of answering that in the form of this story is like, we got Dave Sampson, former Marlins exec. I forget the other person who was
Amin Al-Hassan,
who's in Phoenix, you know, like people who know, like he's got a way of presenting it that, you know, sort of, you know, the fucking desk, like high production value is one way of doing it. But again, I think that like we lose, and it's not any individual's fault, it's just the nature of the system. You lose the ability to like put that thing in a more familiar context that helped people, you know, understand what the gravity of it was. And now that context is just gone. You know, it's like, and I'm not sure people trust the New York Times the same way. You know, I can see that point as well.
I'm curious for your opinion on this, Harry, because you're closer to the millennial Zoomer border. Noah and I are Wash Kings over here. You can't, you know, listeners won't be able to hear, but we had to take a mandatory lower back stretching break for a while. So
I had to get my Caesar trimmed up.
No cap.
Well, so I should also say I have a sort of a closeness too, because I used to work with Metalark, which a Pablo Torre finds out production, and so I've worked with. I haven't myself worked on Pablo Torre shows, but I've worked with some of the people who are part of his team, and kind of did get to see the rigor of his team. And one of the things I do really appreciate about what Pablo's doing is he is like, when there was a newsroom in a magazine, we would have fact checkers and we would have producers, and it was rigorous, and they cost a lot of money, and we had lawyers and all that stuff. And all of that got lost in the pivot to video, much to the thrill of the financial backers of these organizations. And Pablo has been really like, we are not skimping on any of that stuff, which I think is great. And I think it's how he can confidently pop off like this.
It shows.
It does show. Yeah.
It's what gets weird though is like, you know, somebody else who makes like a thing that has like a long in the tooth production time, a really long lead production time.
Yes,
better way of saying it. Like, and you know, who also makes a product that can get long in the tooth in terms of how long the episodes are. You know, 10 episodes, 10 hours of you know, it's a fucking Ezra Edelman documentary length thing. Like I think that is absolutely, like, to me, like everybody makes talk shows now, which is fine. I'm happy to be on this talk show.
I was gonna say,
but like it's like it's the most common form, and I think it's because like there's a whole bunch of different reasons as to how like you can approach it as to why it has evolved that way from a bunch of different angles, and to make something that is not that. Even if it's like in the trappings of a talk show, like he's at a desk with two other guys and they're talking about the story, but is not that, is like I think is vital, and is probably where, if we like save our country, the ability to like return to something like holding two thoughts together at the same time, is like an important piece of it. Where to me, I think it'll be interesting to see is if like, can there be more than one Pablo Torre? Not because Pablo Torre is so big as an institution, but because like, this is a point I've made. So 404 Media is an amazing news collective. They do a lot of reporting on Silicon Valley stuff and other tech stuff. And one of their editors is a guy I respect tremendously, Jason Kobler, made this point about how like he thought the future of news were these co-ops, kind of like 404 Media, kind of like Defector, and so forth. And I it feels nitpicky, but I don't quite think that's true. Why? Because everybody who works at 404 and most of the people who work at Defector and somebody like myself, for example, we all began our careers in more conventional newsrooms where we learned those skills, where we had those resources that you were just talking about, like legal, like fact checking, like the ability to spend weeks on a small thing just to make sure that it's airtight and so forth. Like those things, like, can there be more, that's more or less what Pablo is able to offer with these investigations and the process that goes to them. Is that replicable? Can there be successor generations of that if like there weren't newsrooms left for these people to cut their teeth in? And I tend to be skeptical. I tend to think that like, this may be an exciting thing that like that is great for its time, but that like is not replicable.
Well, and so to this point, I'll kind of lay out some of my critiques, because I do listen to this and I have the feeling of when you are watching a TV show that was pitched as a 6-part series and then they say this is an 8-part series and they have to, you can see the treading water, and I did kind of, I oscillated honestly, because at times I was like, okay, like Jesus Christ, like tell me what this company did. Tell me like this is not, I didn't need 45 minutes of stilted riffing. Like get me to what is going on so I can get on with my day, right? And to the point of like Pablo's there is some kind of funny parasocial element to it, but like he's not I don't know. Maybe he's just like not really focused on like letting his personality come through, which is like fine, whatever. I totally get not wanting the parasocial component. But anyway, I'm torn where I see that and I'm like, this feels like, kind of to your point, Pablo Torre is an investigator. He is a great investigative journalist and just happens to be in the long form video podcast era of media and needs the budget and infrastructure and, interlocks with DraftKings or wherever. And so like is in a way that is both endearing and kind of confusing, shoehorning a magazine article into a podcast in a way that, again, I am like, in a way that I basically like, if I were his boss, I would tell him to stop doing. But as just somebody like, it's like not my money. I'm like, hell yeah, do it.
And I think that, it's like the simple fact is if you slap a bunch of digital ads on an article, it makes no money. If you slap a bunch of ads on an 1.5 hour YouTube video that gets like 1 million views or however many, like that makes a lot more money.
Right.
And it's sort of a simple principle. And it's not just that like the ads that you get programmatically from YouTube or that, it's that the brand activation or, like the brand partnerships, whatever, with FanDuel, DraftKings, Factor Meals, whatever, like those are like, that's also, real money that you do not get with the written word. It's just not how those media think. And so I think you're totally right that I agree with it quite strongly that yes, this is like a case of like a really good journalist doing what really good journalists have to do now, which is adjusting to the change in the medium. And, and it's part of why I think you have to be kind of a fool to fault somebody like that for trying to to make those to adjust to the medium when it's like cool. Otherwise, the thing doesn't get done. Those people working on it don't get fed, and on top of which, like there doesn't. I believe, and this is like a little more like cornball of me, but like I do believe that at this moment, more so than I felt like a number of years ago, I really do believe in the importance of like modeling success in that, like, not modeling like scoping it out. I mean, modeling like as a role model, like modeling the idea that actually you can do work that has integrity and you can take stands and you can say things that people like, you can do the thing, you can say true things that other people do not want to be material, public information. And like the world doesn't end. You don't get sued into oblivion. You don't get socially ostracized. Your car doesn't get run off the road.
Totally.
Although I would definitely do a 5-point safety inspection if I were him. These next few weeks, or Kevin Draper should at least.
Man, that was crazy.
Yeah.
Something you brought up earlier is this sort of idea of iterative reporting. And it's going to be, this is like Pablo has broken news. Like we've mentioned, like the Jordan Hudson thing. It was like a big story that came from him. This is like a huge story that came from him. And like scoops help reporters get scoops. And I'm going to be really interested to see in the next 3 months, like, does he advance this story in some big way? Like, does he get just other big stuff because of this? Like, if you are someone who's sitting on, like, think about the inverse of this. Like, if you're someone who's sitting on potentially explosive information and you want to make sure it gets out there in like the most interesting, like big way, like, who do you go to? It's like Pablo made sense as the person. Yeah. If not like, because these were public records, but the way this often works is someone is like, if you FOIA this specific sentence, you'll find the public record that you're looking for.
Yeah. Somebody told them to go looking for those bankruptcy docs. And then obviously we have an idea of who some of those people are because Pablo did what is the much harder and much more impressive thing than the paper trail is the paper trail is the proof, but the thing that is more impressive as a work of journalism, and that I was very impressed by, was all the human reporting. Yeah. Because it's like one thing to have a bunch of pieces of paper that tell you where the money goes. It's another thing to have people who can give you context for it. And Cuban can take some fucking crazy hike with like his whole line about how this, with the idea that they misunderstood it or whatever, like, the insane stuff you're talking there. Like, it's, I think that to me was the piece of it. And that is, by the way, one of the things with like the video podcast thing that I thought, I'm not going to say it's like innovative. He's not the first person to figure out how to mask a voice, but like, doing the thing with the prop with all the paper, doing the, like showing how much paper they look through, having the voice masking when you don't really need to do that much, like get up. It sells the story in the process of it in a way that I was talking about, that context of like being above the fold in the New York Times used to help supply for you.
This is actually really interesting because especially the hearing about this, it's silly, but I think it's real. This divide between the maybe older millennials, Gen X folk who did get to see how a newsroom worked. Because of my sort of meandering career, really didn't.
Yeah, you're now a 996 cracked coder making Gen AI.
I'm cracked. Exactly. I chose that route. But the on the other hand, what I do have, because I'm an old soul in that I'm 30, but I feel like I'm 34, is I do have, and I think a lot of people trying to navigate in this particular cohort have a serious aversion to the dirty work that you're talking about because you didn't need to use to do it. You didn't need to use to make a thumbnail of you putting your face in some fuck ass way to sell your story. It used to just get put, if it was a good story, it would get, your editor would be like, this should be on 1A, and then that's where it would go. And so there is this serious version that I feel as well, perhaps because I've been such a good crack 10x engineer, but that like, well, I don't want to do that shit. Like and so I admire that Pablo has gone all in a way that sometimes rubs me as annoying, but then I am reminded like, this is actually very cool that he's like pushing, like he knows that this is the only way to square the circle here. He knows that if he wants his people to get paid fairly and he wants to do investigative journalism, he's got to do the YouTube shit. And there's just no way around it. And he could like lay off some people, or he could not do the YouTube shit, and he's between a rock and a hard place. And I actually wanted to ask you, Noah, specifically about this because you are working on two projects, I think that thread this needle. One, it's funny. Pablo had this quote in a later interview he did like yesterday, saying, "I fear sometimes that we put too much into this for people to absorb, like too much info." And one of the things I think of with Blowback seasons is just how rich and dense they are, and like how what I like about them is that they, because of how you lay it out and the kind of excitement and propulsion, you get people through that denseness. But like that's a choice. Like you have to you decided to like make this dense thing and have people rise to that occasion. And then the other one is like the work to some degree you've done with the Adam Friedland Show, which is also sort of doing this like YouTube comedy thing that also touches on important political issues. So I'm curious how you think about like this Trojan horse act that you have to do.
I think some of it is, with Blowback, if people feel, and Pablo, I'm sure, has learned this as well, like, in his time, like sort of adjusting to like the new pod reality. The skip 30, skip 15, rewind 30 is like your friend. And not that I don't think that that's like kept in mind for how we make Blowback specifically, but that like there is a way in which, if somebody's like, oh, I've zoned out for a minute, or, oh, like I didn't quite catch that. You can people can adjust. I think what's more, you in making any like big thing, like obviously like the idea of like what's included is everybody wants, like you're not everybody, but you always want to be able to include everything and cut nothing. But when you're, the way we think about it with Blowback is that we're telling a story. And so in telling a story, what do people need to know? And then what do we need to include? Because if we were to tell the story without this information, it wouldn't be complete. And that, is sort of like how, like, those are like the flip sides of it. And then by the time I think that we're late into a season in terms of like writing and recording it and understanding it, Brendan and I will have like a sense of like, well, this needs to be in it because it continues this storyline and brings it to completion, or this segment like adds this dimension of information so that then people will know this part about this piece of it, or we'll think of this character in a different way or whatever. I think with news, it's a little bit harder because you're dealing with, it's like, I think it is just harder. And it's a much, you have to, the judiciousness of deciding what's newsworthy or what's not, when you're talking about something that's current, is very different than when you're talking about how to weight history. So I really like, I don't think that, like his idea of like, I fear too much, we put too much into this to absorb, like people may not absorb it, but like I generally tend to trust like the journalist instinct of what has to be included, because it does, again, like within reason, it does tell the listener like, all of like the material context, even if it can be a little bit much to sink in at once. And if somebody has to revisit it for the record, which is often what this stuff, really matters, then, they'll like, then the information's there and it's not sitting in a Google Drive somewhere. And to your point about the Adam Friedland Show, I mean, look, I'll be the first to say that like a lot of the times when something like really pops off for TAFs, I will have told Adam like a week before, like, I think this sucks. Like, or
that's not what I thought you were gonna say.
Yeah. Like,
wait, say
That's so
like
funny.
but it's not because like it does suck. It's because like it's not my, like, to do like talk show YouTube podcast stuff is to do things that are just like not like it's not my like, it's not how I consume stuff. It's not like I don't like I think
you give the Unk perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, even though like Adam is like the oldest Gen Z guy I know at like age, like at the like beautiful boy of 38 years old or whatever. It's not how I consume stuff, but more than that, it is also that like it is like people feel so, and part of why I think talk shows have taken off in this particular way, and what Adam is really skilled at is that talk like we have so much in terms of Instagram and access to and exposure of celebrities and people and so on, that like when you are able to just represent them in a way that feels, even like a bit human, and if it's like sitting with a really funny guy or sitting with a guy who's being really annoying at them for 30 minutes and seeing what happens, you get, you get something new, you get something novel. And as a as a podcast like product, I think people like, similar to Pablo, like, and I know Adam and Pablo are in touch, but like, similar to that, it's like, yeah, like you've got like a real set. You've got like a distinct visual identity. The thumbnails, they're fuck assed up.
Right.
People like it's like the business is taken care of. There's the, sponsorships and so forth. But like that's, a way of conveying the seriousness or conveying the depth of the project. And it builds a lot of trust with people. That people take the project seriously. And I think, as I think they should. One of the things with like the Pablo Torre finds out, side of it that I find, a really good example of this is that like, he's doing like a talk show where they're talking through the story, in this like kind of like elevated hang or whatever,
right.
Like, the like thing is.
That was what we were almost going to call this podcast that.
That's funny. But the way, that it breaks through is not because like, like the fucking like the vibes are so off the charts, man. It's because it looks like a very seriously taken endeavor that is like fitted to suit this form. And like Taft's, I wasn't in the room and working with like Nick and Adam and like coming up with all this stuff. Like, I don't want to like pretend like I have like a special like well-conceived insight as to like how all that came together, but just as like, having worked on episodes and seeing how it's been received in this like really successful way, I do think that like that is such a huge piece of it, that people encounter this thing as this very seriously taken endeavor with a lot of resources behind it, and are thus so stimulated. It's not just like Come Town on TV, it's a different thing.
Yeah,
totally. What I have a few more. I'm curious about the Adam Friedland stuff, and I wanted to ask about the Richie Torres interview.
Yeah.
But do we have where are we on time? You got time?
I can go for probably 10 more minutes or so.
Okay,
Cool.
You got time?
Yeah.
Okay, so my understanding is that you're a producer on the Adam Friedland Show / kind of like his number one shooter for when he has a more serious political guest on. I
think like it's like there's like the way that like the Grateful Dead used to divide up song credits and stuff, or would be like they would just all get together after they were done in the studio and just sort of like divvied out how it felt fair. So like I'm not particularly attached to labels. I think most of the time I'm credited as researcher. On the Richie Torres episode, I'm writer.
Okay.
I think in other places I've been, the work would be called producer. But it's like just it doesn't. Exactly.
That makes sense.
Well, the way I do it though is that like I will write, so I learn who the guest is, and it's usually pretty quick turnaround just with how their booking arrangements work. And so I will come up with like not really a list of questions, but just sort of like a sort of brief bio, and then some like like a progressive staging of questions. So it's like, here's this information about a person, here are things you can ask, and so on. And sometimes Adam asks directly the stuff that I've written, and a lot of the times though he is very much ad-libbing it. Or what I've sent is like a thing that he's like, oh, that's interesting, and then he looks and researches his own about it. And then we'll spend a lot of time talking before an interview about how it's going to go. And sometimes it's pretty normal and boring. And I'm not even present for most of them. Like we do all the prep and then I don't go to the studio. I was in the studio for Richie Torres.
Yeah.
I was in the studio.
What was it like in there?
And like, how did it? Because this Richie Torres interview really, I felt like broke containment and kind of had this. It's funny. There's been a lot of meta discourse. Pablo has gone on this whole press tour, and a lot of people have been like, "This is a story that people are talking to me about." That's the same for the Adam for the Taft Richie Torres. The ground team is strong on that one, and it was a really kind of compelling and insane interview.
So I will say, and I like, and so after it came out, I had to call Adam, and I had to call Adam, and I had to tell him, Adam, I was wrong, you were right, which I hate doing. I hate doing. But I told him he was wrong, I was right, because I wasn't sure how it would be received. And I had told him, like, I had been in the room for when it was, and I want to tell you, like, I wanted to die. Like, it was because part of it is, like, you never know how an interview, like, when you're in a room for something, and it's like me, Richie Torres, this PR guy, and then 2 camera ops, and then the 2 of them, and that's it.
Wow.
And it was, it was very tense.
Yeah, Richie was not having a good time.
No, and like I'm tense, and I'm not really, like, how I perceive something is not necessarily how, like, audiences are going to perceive something. And it also, like, wasn't necessarily like Adam and I did not, like, spend hours and hours and hours, like, meticulously drawing up for that to go how it went. I don't feel like I need to say too much about, like, what our prep was or what we wanted to do, because I feel like I think Adam accomplished what he wanted to with it in terms of, like, where he was able to steer the conversation, how Torres responded, and sort of, like, how people took from it what they may. I think that, like, what was so my friend Jacob, who's also credited as a writer on this episode, Jacob Plittman, who's the former publisher of Jewish Currents, just got married this weekend. It was a lovely time.
Shout out.
Jacob made this really good observation.
I'm not going to say what kind of wedding it was.
It was a Jewish wedding. So Jacob made this really good point to me after it came out, that, like, part of why that segment traveled so long, why it did, was because Richie Torres is a guy whom a lot of people want to see laid low. And they have, like, a real investment in it, in part because, like, the emotionally, this is, like, just where people are anymore. Like, we don't have, like, the capacity to actually influence things. We can just see the surrogates for the causes either, like, raised up or laid low. And in the case of, like, Torres, like, he is a particularly, like, he's an off-putting guy in a lot of different ways. And to me, what felt most kind of intriguing was how people saw that, like, Adam, really represented himself as like I've got this, like, I've got this fucking, like, Israel albatross wrapped around me as, like, a person,
right?
Considering like the context in which I was raised and in which I became a human, and there's lots of people like us, and, like, you're over there saying, like, rah rah rah, and I, like, don't know what the fuck you're talking about, and, like, people, like, have wanted, like, it was like, I underrated the extent to which, like, how many people wanted to say something like that themselves to him. And so that there was a guy finally doing that. And so I think that, this is another piece of the video podcast thing, is the way in which it does allow somebody, whether you're as, like, just well credentialed and established as a journalist as Pablo Torre, or the comedian who pooped his pants on a mic once, like, it conveys, like, a sense of, I am of the common man. I'm a tribune of the people to a point. And that, like, level of identification, I think, was, like, something, Jacob pointed that out, and I thought that he was totally right. And that it helped explain a lot to me about why I ended up being wrong, because I did not necessarily think that it was, like, it was such an easy watch. And I'm really happy that I was proven. I was happy to see the reaction, and that people, like, saw what they saw.
Sure.
Yeah. It was like, now I'm just imagining Isaac Chotiner, another interviewer, former guest, friend of the show. I'm just imagining if he started taping these interviews with, like, repellent Biden world people, because he does this thing when he sees that he's got you, like you've said something, he kind of, like, leans in and he's like, "What was that? Say that again."
Well, he also,
that would work in the video form.
He also does something, though, that, like, is it's a good point of, like, sort of divergence from what I think Adam does, but also, like, part of what makes Chotiner so special, and is more my nature and my instinct when I've done interviews. I actually, a few years ago, like 7 years ago, I had an interview. I did, like, an interview column for New York Magazine on their website. And, like, I had a pretty good couple of contentious interviews with, like, the New York official who approved, who was, like, leading the Amazon HQ2 stuff. I did one with Eric Holder that I'm really proud of. But, like, my nature is to, like, go for, like, a gotcha, more or less. Not, like, a gotcha in, like, a cheap way, just that, like, I like confrontation on that level as an interviewer. And I think Chotner's so good at it. But part of why he's so good at it, and you can see it in the transcripts, is that he wants people to say what they believe, but he's done enough homework both on the issue and of these people that like when they get to what they start explaining themselves, he just knows when to press them and how to massage more interesting things out of them, even if they're not the exact thing he's looking for. And like that is such a good, whereas I think like Adam's strategy, like we do this prep, and he feels like he does a lot more feeling his way, I think. But the thing that he is so I give Adam a lot of credit for is like, again, this like response of like, how does somebody just like register, do they pass the hang test? Is this somebody that you could have like chemistry for? Is this somebody who is, like it's a different test from like Elliot Abrams doesn't need to convince Isaac Chotiner that like he'd be really good to watch some like ball with.
Yeah.
Like he has to convince Isaac Chotiner, to the extent he has to convince him of anything at all, that like I am not like a evil blood-sucking person who wants to kill all these people in this way. And like Richie Torres, I think that like he didn't get grilled too aggressively on the facts of like what it is that you support and like what are the contours of it. Like there was some sparring about that. It was really about this level of like, how do you hold those positions and then represent yourself as like, like a guy who we're supposed to like, like as a human being, somebody with red blood cells,
No, I totally, the most powerful moments of the Adam Friedland interview were the pauses before Richie Torres would speak. Because it was just these moments of like, this motherfucker, like, what is he going to say?
He's about to rationalize like the worst shit you've ever heard. And you can just see him like compose himself.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, and also he did a thing that I did not realize in the moment that like Adam actually handled really well, which was that like basically guys like that, like they've got a lot of talking points. They've got a lot of factoids down that like match the talking points, blah, 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 blah. But like as a consequence, right, when somebody does not play, when somebody decides, I don't give a fuck about those. I don't care about like the person who got yelled at a restaurant, by like a kid with blue hair. I don't give a fuck about whatever example you're bringing up. Then like it is like it destabilizes the situation. And that to me, like I thought like would come across more as like, oh, like, well, you're not engaging him in the conversation and you're the interviewer or whatever. But in reality, it's like, no. Like if you just don't play with like those things, then it kind of doesn't matter because like people don't buy them. Like they see it as shtick.
Right.
Yeah.
They see it as like a rehearced like canned.
You don't have to
anyway.
engage with that.
Exactly. You just move on. Like which he, and also because he's Jewish, he can say that. And like I think a lot of, a non-Jewish host dismissing that like Torres would have done, like, he would have like literally put his hands on his hips and been like, well.
Totally. Well, it's what you're doing with the Adam Friedland Show is great.
I give the Adam deserves
and what Adam's doing. Yeah,
he deserves. Like I don't want to overstate my role in this. Like,
of course.
It's I think it really there's a really good team of people who work on it. Tom Eisenman, Caleb Pitts. They're like tremendous crew behind the camera. People should really look at the credits and not just my name.
Yep.
And Blowback. New season drops very soon.
Yes, September 22nd right now, the Monday after next that we're recording this. The new season is about Angola.
Yeah, you tell us a little bit about the new season.
Sure.
What's going on?
So every year we do a different chapter of American foreign policy and sort of like a chapter of American empire. And Angola is sort of one of these aggressively undercovered and little remembered sagas in which we involved ourselves, really beginning in the 70s. So Angola is a nation in southwestern Africa. It's just north of the nation of Namibia. Both are huge countries. Angola is like 4 times the size of France. And in the mid 1970s, when Portugal was leaving, its empire was in decline. There was a competition among factions to take control who would be the successor in Angola. And a Marxist faction was the sort of heir apparent to the Portuguese government for a number of reasons. They controlled the capital, but they were imperiled. And so South Africa in 75, on the eve of independence of Angola, invades, and a little island nation of Cuba sends another poor country, sends vital troops and military aid that stops the South African advance.
And previous Blowback subject.
Yes. Cuba, the Cuban Revolution we cover, and we talk a bit about the Angolan intervention. And I think that with this episode, with this season, what we really, sort of use that 75, it comes a couple episodes in, but it's then a springboard to talk about the next 15 years in particular, which are the Angolan Civil War, but which the U.S. is involved in in supporting as a proxy war. In 75, we got involved with the big CIA operation that went tits up and became a national scandal. But then, as a couple of years pass, we start to really secretly involve ourselves, and then not so secretly, but still under the table a bit, involving ourselves in a proxy war against this Marxist government, against the Cubans, with apartheid South Africa, and with a local warlord named Jonas Savimbi, whom veterans of the Call of Duty franchise might remember. But the story of the season is about the Cubans and Angolans fighting against apartheid South Africa and Savimbi. We talk about the Reagan administration in the 1980s and the extent to which this war in Africa became one of the many Contra wars that we were fighting all over the world at that time. It's a really, it's definitely one of the hardest seasons I've ever worked on, just in terms of like learning about a subject I didn't know too much about, finding really good sources for it as a non-Portuguese speaker too. But it's really, really good shit. And Brendan as ever made a really special soundtrack, and we have some really good guest interviews. And it's a really crazy story, and it's one of those stories that when you start to hear it, you're like, wow. Like it was for me, especially making it, the double whammy of like, I didn't know all this, and I can't believe I didn't know any of it. Like
that's the itch that Blowback scratches for me.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah, so I'm pleased to scratch that itch of the eardrums of all of our listeners. But truly, I'm really excited for this. We're going to release a new trailer. It'll probably be out by the time this episode is out.
Okay.
Sweet.
So go look at our socials to see that, and download Blowback wherever you get your podcasts.
Hell yeah. I will leave us with the fact. There is one NBA player from Angola.
Hit me.
Bruno Fernando. He was drafted in the second round in 2019. He played for the Raptors last year, and he's now just left the NBA.
Yeah.
Is he playing in Europe?
Real Madrid, yeah.
Oh, good for him.
Yeah,
That's a real team.
he's making money.
Yeah, good for him.
Thank you so much for joining us. This was great.
This is the best. Always love coming back on Nothing But Respect.
That's right.
All right.